Across the ancient world, a single story rises again and again like water from the depths. In the Bible, it is Noah and the Ark. In Mesopotamia, it appears as Utnapishtim, Ziusudra, and Atrahasis, each warned of a coming deluge and chosen to preserve life as the world collapses beneath the floodwaters. These accounts were recorded by civilizations separated by vast distances, yet they speak with a strikingly similar voice. Why would cultures that never encountered one another remember the same catastrophe in such precise detail? Is this simply shared mythology, or the fragmented memory of a real event so immense it reshaped human history forever? And what if these ancient warnings did not come solely from gods of belief, but from beings who descended from the sky, possessing knowledge far beyond early human understanding? In this episode, we follow the traces of the Great Flood across texts, ruins, and forgotten traditions, searching for the truth hidden beneath humanity's oldest memory. But first, you'll have incredible luck if you like and subscribe before this video ends. The story of a great flood is not confined to a single scripture, culture, or civilization. Instead, it appears again and again across the ancient world, as if humanity collectively agreed on one thing: that long ago, the earth was overwhelmed by water, and only a few were chosen to endure. From the biblical account of Noah to the Mesopotamian epics of Utnapishtim and Atrahasis, from the Sumerian tale of Ziusudra to distant traditions preserved in Asia, Africa, and the Americas, the pattern remains strikingly consistent. In these narratives, the world is warned, a righteous or favored human is selected, a vessel is prepared, life is preserved, and after the waters recede, humanity begins again. Such precise narrative alignment raises a difficult question for conventional history, because myths usually evolve in isolation, shaped by local beliefs and environments. Yet flood stories defy this rule, sharing not only themes but detailed structures that suggest something more than creative imagination at work. Anthropologists often describe these accounts as symbolic morality tales, metaphors for renewal or divine judgment. Yet this explanation begins to strain under the weight of their similarities. Could it be that these myths are not independent inventions but distorted memories of a single catastrophic event, one so immense that it permanently engraved itself into human consciousness? If so, what could have caused the disaster powerful enough to flood vast regions of the planet, erase entire civilizations, and force humanity into a global reset? And more provocatively, what if the gods who warned the survivors were not merely poetic abstractions, but representations of advanced beings, watchers from the sky, possessing knowledge beyond early human understanding? This possibility shifts the flood narrative from simple mythology into something far more unsettling. Not just a story of divine punishment, but a record, fragmented, encoded, and preserved, of an ancient intervention that forever altered the trajectory of human history. And if these stories are echoes of something real, then the flood may not mark the end of an age, but the beginning of a mystery we are only now beginning to remember. In the book of Genesis, the story of the Great Flood is not presented as a random natural disaster, but as a deliberate response to a world that had drifted far from its intended order. Humanity, created from dust and animated by divine breath, had multiplied across the earth. Yet with this growth came a profound moral collapse. The ancient text describes a civilization consumed by violence, corruption, and unrestrained desire, where every intention of the human heart had turned persistently toward evil. According to Genesis, this degeneration did not go unnoticed. Yahweh, the creator who once declared the world very good, now observed a creation that no longer reflected its sacred design. The text speaks with unsettling clarity, portraying a divine grief so deep that it led to an unthinkable decision: to wipe the earth clean of humanity, along with the animals, the birds, and every living creature that moved upon the ground. Yet within this overwhelming judgment, one figure stands apart. Noah is introduced as a righteous man, described as blameless among the people of his generation, someone who still walked in alignment with the will of God. While the world descended into chaos, Noah remained a rare anomaly. And it is this distinction that sets the stage for humanity's survival. Yahweh instructs Noah to construct an ark, not merely as a vessel, but as a sanctuary of preservation, designed with precise measurements and built according to divine instruction. Into this massive structure, Noah is commanded to bring his family and representatives of every animal species, ensuring that life itself would not vanish from the earth. When the ark is completed and sealed, the floodwaters arrive, described as bursting forth from the depths and falling relentlessly from the heavens, reshaping the planet and erasing all that lay outside the ark's protection. After the waters finally recede and the land emerges once more, Noah steps into a transformed world, silent, cleansed, and profoundly altered. It is here that a new covenant is established, a sacred agreement between God and humanity, marked by a symbol that still endures. The rainbow, stretched across the sky, becomes a sign of divine restraint, a promise that the earth will never again be destroyed in this manner. But beneath this familiar narrative lies a deeper question, one rarely asked. Was the flood solely an act of judgment, or was it also a calculated reset, an intentional preservation of a chosen lineage, designed to restore balance to a world that had lost its way? Long before the book of Genesis took its final written form, the civilizations of ancient Mesopotamia had already preserved their own detailed account of a world-destroying flood. These stories were recorded on clay tablets and embedded within epic narratives such as the Epic of Gilgamesh and the earlier Atrahasis myth. In these texts, the survivor of the deluge is known as Atrahasis or Utnapishtim, a man whose role mirrors Noah in striking and unsettling ways. Like the biblical patriarch, he is warned in advance by higher beings, instructed to build a massive vessel, and commanded to preserve both his family and the living creatures of the earth. The cause of the flood in the Mesopotamian version, however, reveals a different but equally disturbing perspective. Humanity, according to these ancient texts, was created by the gods, often identified as the Anunnaki, to serve as laborers, maintaining the land and fulfilling the needs of their divine rulers. Over time, the human population expanded rapidly, and with their growth came noise, disorder, and unrest. The constant uproar of mankind became so overwhelming that Enlil, the chief ruler of Earth, could no longer sleep, driven to frustration by what the texts describe as the relentless clamor of human existence. Before resorting to total destruction, the gods attempted lesser forms of punishment. Plagues were unleashed, famine swept across the land, and suffering became widespread. Yet humanity continued to survive and recover. These failed attempts only intensified Enlil's resolve, leading him to summon the divine council and propose a final, irreversible solution. The flood, in this context, was not a random act of nature, but a calculated decision meant to erase humanity entirely and restore balance, silence, and control to the world. Not all the gods agreed with this course of action. Enki, the god of wisdom, creation, and deep knowledge, is portrayed as a compassionate and protective figure, closely tied to the humans he had helped bring into existence. Bound by divine law not to openly defy the council, Enki instead chose a subtle path of resistance. He appeared to Atrahasis in a dream, speaking indirectly through the walls of his home, and revealed the coming catastrophe along with precise instructions for constructing a life-preserving boat capable of surviving the floodwaters. When the waters finally receded and Atrahasis emerged alive with his family and the animals he had saved, Enlil's reaction was one of fury. He had intended complete annihilation, not survival. Yet the other gods intervened, arguing that humanity's continued existence was not a failure, but a necessary part of the divine order. After intense debate, Enlil relented, offering a blessing to Atrahasis and establishing new rules to prevent such total destruction from ever occurring again. Once more, the pattern becomes impossible to ignore. Survival is followed by divine regret. Judgment gives way to restraint, and a form of covenant emerges, an agreement that humanity will not be wiped out completely. When placed alongside the Genesis account, these Mesopotamian narratives feel less like isolated myths and more like parallel memories, preserving the same ancient catastrophe through different cultural lenses, each pointing toward a shared and deeply rooted origin. Beyond the familiar accounts of Noah and the Mesopotamian flood heroes lies another layer of tradition, one that pushes the narrative into far more unsettling territory. This perspective suggests that the Great Flood may not have been directed at humanity alone, but at something far more specific, a hybrid race whose existence threatened the natural order of creation. In this view, the flood becomes less a general punishment and more a deliberate act of purification, designed to erase an abomination that should never have existed. This interpretation emerges most clearly in the Book of Enoch, a non-canonical Jewish text that was widely known in antiquity but later excluded from the biblical canon. Set in the pre-flood world, the text introduces Enoch, the great-grandfather of Noah, as a righteous man chosen to receive divine revelations. Enoch is taken beyond the boundaries of the earth and shown the hidden structure of the cosmos, the movements of celestial bodies, and the forces that shape human destiny. His role is not merely that of a prophet, but of a witness to a reality normally concealed from mankind. Central to Enoch's revelations is the story of the Watchers, celestial beings assigned to observe and guide humanity. According to the text, these Watchers descended to Earth and abandoned their appointed role, becoming captivated by human women. What follows is described as a grave transgression, as these unions produce a new race known as the Nephilim, giants of immense size, strength, and unnatural power. These beings are portrayed not as heroes, but as destabilizing forces whose very existence disrupts the balance between heaven and earth. The Book of Giants, closely associated with Enochic tradition, expands on the consequences of this forbidden interbreeding. The Nephilim are depicted as violently oppressive, consuming the resources of the earth and turning against humanity itself. The texts describe acts of extreme brutality, including the merciless killing of humans and even the consumption of human flesh, transforming the world into a place of chaos, fear, and moral collapse. In this corrupted environment, creation no longer reflects divine intention, and the earth itself is described as crying out under the weight of this disorder. Within this framework, the flood takes on a radically different meaning. Rather than a vague moral correction, it becomes a calculated reset, a cleansing designed to remove the hybrid beings and end the corruption introduced by the fallen Watchers. Noah, as the descendant of Enoch, is selected not only for his righteousness, but as a representative of an uncorrupted lineage, preserved to restart humanity according to its original design. In this light, the Great Flood stands as a moment of cosmic intervention, an attempt to restore order, reestablish boundaries, and erase a chapter of history that had pushed creation beyond its intended limits. The narrative of the Great Flood does not end in the lands of the Bible or Mesopotamia. Far to the east, within the ancient traditions of India, another remarkably similar account emerges, one that again centers on divine warning, preservation of life, and rebirth after total destruction. In Hindu teachings, this survivor is known as Manu, the primordial man and first king, whose story unfolds with details that closely parallel those of Noah and Utnapishtim. According to the ancient texts, Manu is approached not by a storm or a prophecy, but by a small, mysterious fish that seeks his protection. This creature later reveals itself to be Vishnu in disguise, a supreme deity associated with cosmic order and preservation. Vishnu warns Manu of an impending deluge that will engulf the world, instructing him to build a great boat and fill it with pairs of living creatures and the seeds of all plants. As the waters rise and the earth disappears beneath a vast ocean, Vishnu, now manifesting as an enormous fish, guides the vessel safely through the chaos, ensuring the survival of life itself. When the floodwaters finally recede, Manu's boat comes to rest upon a mountain, echoing once more the familiar image of salvation anchored at a high place. From this point, Manu begins the task of repopulating the earth, releasing the creatures and plants he had preserved and restoring balance to a world that had been wiped clean. The structure of this account, warning, vessel, flood, mountain, renewal, is so closely aligned with other flood traditions that it becomes increasingly difficult to dismiss as coincidence. Yet the Hindu version introduces an additional layer of mystery. The gods of ancient India are frequently described with strikingly non-human features: blue skin, multiple arms, radiant forms, and celestial vehicles known as vimanas that travel through the sky. Vishnu's ability to transform his physical form, appearing first as a small fish and later as a colossal cosmic being, has led some researchers to question whether these descriptions represent symbolic theology or something more literal. Shape-shifting, advanced technology, and skyborne travel are characteristics often associated in modern interpretations with extraterrestrial beings. When these elements are viewed alongside similar motifs from biblical, Mesopotamian, and other global flood myths, a pattern begins to emerge that transcends cultural boundaries. The repetition of divine warnings, life-preserving vessels, supernatural guidance, and post-flood renewal suggests that these stories may not be isolated inventions, but fragmented memories of a single extraordinary event. If so, the flood narratives preserve the cross-civilizations may represent humanity's collective attempt to remember and explain a catastrophe so vast that it reshaped both the physical world and humanity's understanding of its place within the cosmos. As compelling as the ancient flood narratives are, many researchers have attempted to move beyond myth and scripture in search of physical traces, geological scars that might confirm a catastrophe of unprecedented scale. Rather than offering definitive proof, these findings form a collection of intriguing clues, fragments of evidence that seem to point toward violent events capable of reshaping coastlines, climates, and entire civilizations. Together, they create a quasi-scientific framework that invites deeper reflection rather than simple dismissal. One such clue lies hidden beneath the waters of the Indian Ocean, where researchers have identified what is known as the Burkle Crater, a massive impact structure measuring nearly 30 kilometers in diameter. Some scientists suggest that this crater may be the result of an ancient asteroid impact, one powerful enough to generate enormous tsunamis that would have raced across the ocean, inundating vast coastal regions within hours. If such an event occurred during early human history, it could explain widespread flood traditions and sudden disruptions in ancient settlements along shorelines. Additional evidence comes from unusual geological formations known as chevrons, discovered in places such as Madagascar and Australia. These large, V-shaped sediment deposits contain marine fossils found far inland and at elevated heights, locations where ocean life should not naturally exist. Their presence has led some geologists to propose that massive waves, far larger than ordinary tsunamis, once surged across these regions, carrying seawater and marine debris deep into the continents. While debated, these formations continue to challenge conventional explanations of localized flooding. Another hypothesis focuses on the end of the last ice age, a period marked by rapid climate change and rising sea levels. Some researchers theorize that a comet or asteroid impact during this time could have triggered sudden melting of ice sheets, unleashing global floods and wiping out early advanced civilizations that existed before recorded history. In this scenario, the Great Flood becomes not a singular mythic event, but a cascading series of catastrophes that permanently altered the human timeline. This idea aligns closely with one of history's most enduring legends, Atlantis. According to the Greek philosopher Plato, Atlantis was a highly advanced civilization that existed around 9600 BC and was destroyed in a single day and night by catastrophic earthquakes and floods. Though often dismissed as allegory, the timing of Plato's account coincides strikingly with the proposed end of the Ice Age and the hypothesized cosmic impacts of that era. The sudden disappearance of an advanced society beneath the sea mirrors the fate described in flood myths worldwide. Adding further weight to this mystery are ancient sites such as Göbekli Tepe in Turkey and Gunung Padang in Indonesia, both dating back to the same transitional period. These locations reveal sophisticated construction techniques and architectural knowledge that appear far ahead of what mainstream history attributes to early hunter-gatherer societies. Their existence raises a provocative question. Could these sites be remnants of a lost global network of pre-flood civilizations erased by a cataclysm so vast that only fragments of memory survived? When viewed together, these theories form a pattern that refuses to be ignored. They suggest that humanity may have inherited a world shaped by disaster, one that buried its earliest achievements beneath water, sediment, and time. And if such a network of civilizations once existed, then the Great Flood may not simply mark an ending, but the deliberate erasure of a forgotten chapter of human history. In the aftermath of the Great Flood, the ancient text suggests that the world which emerged was fundamentally different from the one that existed before. Among the most intriguing details come from the Dead Sea Scrolls, where Noah is described not merely as a righteous survivor, but as a figure with an unusual and almost otherworldly appearance. His complexion is said to differ from that of ordinary humans, and his eyes are described as radiant, glowing with an inner light that sets him apart from those around him. Such descriptions have led some to speculate that Noah may not have been entirely ordinary, but rather part of a preserved lineage, possibly untouched by the corruption that had spread through the pre-flood world. Following the flood, ancient traditions across cultures describe a dramatic shift in the nature of reality itself. Mythical beings who once walked openly among humans, gods, giants, and other supernatural entities seem to vanish from the historical record. Where divine figures were once said to rule cities, take human lovers, and directly shape events, their presence becomes increasingly distant and subtle. The gods no longer walk among mankind, and humanity appears to be left to develop largely on its own, guided more by memory and ritual than by direct intervention. This transformation is reflected in another ancient source, course, the Sumerian king list, which draws a clear dividing line at the moment of the flood. Before the deluge, kings are said to have ruled for tens of thousands of years, possessing lifespans far beyond anything known in the post-flood world. After the flood, these extraordinary reigns abruptly end, and human lifespans diminish to more familiar proportions. The flood thus functions as a historical and biological turning point, marking not only the end of an age, but a fundamental change in the relationship between humans and those who once guided them. The region surrounding Mount Ararat adds yet another layer to this mystery. Some traditions claim that the first post-flood settlements were established nearby, raising the possibility that Noah's journey did not end with survival alone, but with the deliberate rebuilding of civilization. Within this context, a radical idea begins to emerge, that the ark itself may not have been intended merely as a wooden vessel for animals, but as a carefully designed repository of life, preserving genetic diversity for a world about to be reset. In this interpretation, the Ark becomes less a ship and more a biological archive, safeguarding the future of Earth's ecosystems. Strikingly, this concept finds an echo in the modern world. Today, humanity constructs its own versions of arks in the form of seed banks and DNA repositories, such as the Svalbard Global Seed Vault, built to protect the genetic foundation of life against global catastrophe. These modern efforts reveal an awareness that life is fragile, and that preservation may one day depend on foresight, storage, and deliberate intervention. Ideas that feel eerily familiar when placed alongside ancient flood traditions. If humanity is indeed the descendant of a guided or protected lineage preserved through a deliberate reset of the world, then a final and unavoidable question emerges. Are we simply survivors of a natural disaster, or participants in a long-term plan shaped by forces beyond our understanding? Were the sky gods correcting a mistake, conducting an experiment, or preparing humanity to stand on its own? As we continue to search for answers, the story of the Great Flood remains not just a tale of destruction, but a gateway to understanding our origins, our purpose, and our place in the vastness of the cosmos. Until those answers are found, we invite you to keep your minds open, continue questioning the past, and join us again as we explore the hidden layers of our forgotten history. Until we meet again.